That's a rather unusual request. Well, the man making it is Dr. Roger Corby. Are you certain you recognize his voice? Have you ever been engaged, Mr. Spock? Why, yes, I have. I was engaged to T'Pring. You met her on various occasions. In fact, you once had a conversation with me when I swapped bodies with T'Pring and I was in her body and you helped me through it. Don't you recall any of this? Well, Mr. Spock, it kind of seems like those events won't actually happen for another 50 or so years. I find that statement quite illogical. Oh, Mr. Spock, don't be such a cannon hawk. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for What Are Little Girls Made Of, which is episode 10 of season 1 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this video I will cover the episode What Are Little Girls Made Of. So in this episode, Kirk seeks out this famous scientist who was once the fiancé of Nurse Chapel, and they beam down to the planet where several red shirts are killed and find out that this scientist has been building androids, and he plans... Kirk doesn't, of course, understand because his men were killed, so he plans to replace Kirk with the android version of Kirk, but this plan fails ultimately, and they discover that the scientist himself, Dr. Corby, is in fact an android, and he vaporizes himself, leaving the crew to return. Now, this episode has always been unremarkable. Like, I never, disliked this episode enough to, hate it or throw a lot of vitriol at the episode. It's part of several episodes, which I'm about to get into, in the first season of the original series, which I just find forgettable, personally. Like, they're not good enough to be great, but they're not bad enough to be bad. They're just... there. They're just boring, and they're not really remarkable in any way. Now, this one, I don't really see the point of it, to be honest. I think they were just trying to do a typical stock, android, Kirk becoming under attack sci-fi story. And they didn't really quite pull the script together well enough. Now, they tried to make it interesting by bringing in Nurse Chapel. Of course, this is Roddenberry's contribution to the script, his alterations to include the character whom his girlfriend plays, which apparently there's a lot of controversy of him forcing this character into the show more than the producers wanted. Apparently Roddenberry was almost fired over the affair he had with Nigel Barrett. But anyway, this is only the second episode Nurse Chapel appeared in, and first one being The Naked Time. And then it was just a way of... I think it was interesting because the original script just had some unknown character, some guest character coming in looking for the scientist. I think it makes it a bit more interesting that there is a personal connection to it, and it's a member of the crew that we have seen before. But that being said, this relationship Chapel had to this character is never ever mentioned again. And of course, as I alluded to in my little intro, is completely forgotten entirely by Strange New Worlds. So almost as if it's erased from canon. Although they still could do a storyline that mentions Nurse Chapel marrying this Corby fellow, but I doubt it. Anyway, the thing about this episode I find hard to buy is that they constantly tell us that this is a brilliant scientist and that he's very well known, and Kirk says in several lines that, well, if it was any other man, I doubt you, but you're Dr. Corby, so I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Yet he behaves pretty much like a stereotypical crazy mad scientist in this episode. He eventually reveals he wants to sort of introduce androids into the population where humanity can eventually become immortal by putting themselves in an android body. Which, ironic note here, that's exactly what Picard ends up doing at the end of season 1 of Picard, even though here they portray it as a very, very bad thing, like he's a mad scientist. And look, you could say that his android technology is, on the face of it, there's nothing evil about it nor malicious, but it's the way he goes about trying to force this on society. Is the way that one of his androids goes around killing security men, and he's like, oh, I don't really control Rocked, but that's bullshit. He clearly does. And also the way he tries eventually, when he can't talk Kirk into doing it, so he tries to send an imposter that's impersonating Kirk to force them to do it. So this is a arch villain, stereotypical mustache twirly villain cliche way of handling the situation. So it's not what he wants to do that's villainous, it's how he goes about doing it that's villainous. And so I just don't buy it. I think it seems really, the whole plot seems contrived to me, that if this was a brilliant scientist, even if he had put himself in an android body, which we find out at the end of the episode he had, but it's still a brilliant scientist who's trying to introduce this technology to a larger issue. Now, if they played it straight and he had to go through all this bureaucracy and face skeptics and go into intellectual debates, well, that would be boring. We have to have Kirk fighting androids so that he has to act like a supervillain, but it's plot contrivance and actually doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't. They really hadn't earned the fact that Christine would be married to someone like this. He seems to be acting completely and utterly out of character. Now, some might say that the reveal he's in an android body at the end of the episode explains why he's acting out of character, but I don't think so. I don't think it does. Putting himself into an android body, maybe he lost something of himself, but I still find his behavior incredibly convenient for having a suspense plot. Moreover, we get introduced to the android of Andrea, who happens to be a super, super hot chick. And at first, Christine is jealous of her, thinking Corby is having an affair with her, but he assures her that, it was just an android. I couldn't really have an affair with her. I don't really care. But then they come up with this really ridiculous plot of Kirk seducing her and getting her emotionally involved in Kirk to the point that she tries to kill him and eventually goes insane, killing herself and Dr. Corby. And I do not buy that side plot at all. I mean, I'm sick of this. It's the original series, but of course Kirk has to be the hottest man alive and every girl goes crazy, even android girls, which is bullshit. And I don't appreciate that plot at all. Now, I'm being very negative on this episode, but as I said at this top, I never really hated it enough to these are all contrivances that bother me, but they're not that big of a deal. The episode itself isn't that terrible. It's just boring. It's just unremarkable is its biggest flaw. Yeah, it has all these contrivances I don't buy, but nothing too terrible that makes it sort of painful to watch. It just makes it forgettable, really. Because you do get some interesting moments exploring Christine's past love. Rucht is a somewhat interesting character, and seeing Kirk go head-to-head with him is somewhat interesting, and the suspense plot of Kirk trying to escape. Now, another contrivance, though, I do have to call out is how Kirk, while he's getting turned into an android, which, by the way they make androids by spinning around makes no sense to me, but whatever. And it hurts my ears the way they go, woo, woo, woo. That sequence went on for way too long. But anyway, So while Kirk is being made into an android, he starts saying, "Mind your own business, Mr. Spock. I'm sick of your half-breed nonsense," or whatever. Something really insulting to Spock. And somehow this gets picked up by the android, and the android says it casually to Spock and doesn't think anything of it, but it clues Spock into the fact that this is not the real Captain Kirk. But I have many questions about this. One, how did Captain Kirk know that saying that would imprint this on the android? And also, how does this work exactly? Like, just because Kirk was saying it while the android was being made, the android automatically integrates this into his program, even though it had been established that the android acted pretty much just like Kirk and knew all of his personal backstory about his brother. By the way, this is the first mention of Kirk's brother. I'd forgotten about that. He appears later in the finale, Operation Annihilate, where he dies, but he's actually first mentioned here, and of course he actually becomes a character on Strange New Worlds, which it was never mentioned he was in Starfleet, so I kind of against that, but that's, again, it has to do more to do with Strange New Worlds. But anyway, so the android Kirk is seen as a normal android who's just like Kirk, and it's like a duplicate of Kirk. So I don't understand how it works that just because Kirk said that while he was being made, he randomly says it again to Spock and doesn't realize what he's saying and just casually says it. Like, and how would Kirk know that would work? Like, I don't buy it. I don't buy that he know it would work, and I don't buy that it does work. And also, another thing that bothers me about this episode is that Spock, they make a big deal about, this clues Spock into the fact that he's onto him, and he beams down with the security team. Oh, look, Spock's coming to save the day. And then the whole situation is resolved by the time Spock gets there, so what's the point? What suspense is it if this is too easy a victory for our main characters? Because we already know Spock's on his way to save the day, but he doesn't even have to because Kirk saved the day by himself. So where's the suspense in that, I ask you? Which is why I think this episode's kind of boring and unremarkable. Now, a couple things I want to point out, little details about this episode. One is the scene where Kirk, rips off, where Ruck is chasing after Kirk when he's trying to escape. So he rips off this, hanging rock thing from the cavern and holds it and gets ready to attack Ruck. Now, how shall I put this? I think I should put it that the piece of rock that Kirk is holding is very phallic. I think that's the best way to put it. And in fact, I'm one of the websites that I am a member of, or that I see, is on Facebook. One of the groups or the pages that I'm subscribed to is called Star Trek Without Context. Well, we usually post quotes, images with quotes at the bottom that are kind of funny when taken out of context, or relevant to modern events when taking out of context. But sometimes, usually it posts quotes, but this one time it just posts this image with no context of Kirk standing there holding this very phallic object, and that in itself many found extremely amusing, including myself. There was no funny wording or anything added to the picture to try to be what's Kirk holding or something like that. It was just the image by itself, and that alone was hilarious. The prop department really failed on that one, or maybe they intentionally made it extremely phallic, but why? And the other thing I want to point out is Ruck himself. The strangest thing for the longest time, ever since I first saw this episode, I felt like the actor playing Ruck reminded me so much of Tom Clancy. Oh no, not Tom Clancy. That's the fucking author of The Hunt for October. Clancy Brown. the actor who was in Highlander and Shawshank Redemption and many, many other things. He was, in fact, in Star Trek Enterprise episode Desert Crossing, Star Wars Clone Wars. He's been in so many things. And Lost. He was in Lost. But anyway, Clancy Brown. But of course, it's not Clancy Brown because this came out when Clancy Brown would be, I don't know if he was even born yet. If he was, he would be very young. But it's funny because though watching this actor, I just feels like the way he talks, not just the way he looks, but the way he talks, the way he conducts himself. He looks so much like Clancy Brown, which obviously it isn't. But I always think like that it is. Just like, there's something else I forgot to mention when I did my review of Where New Man Has Gone before, that the actor who played Gary Mitchell, I saw the movie that came out in the early 90s. What was it called? The Wedding Singer with Adam Sandler, and the main villain guy in that movie looked exactly like the actor who played Gary Mitchell, but obviously it isn't because he would be much, much, much older because the Gary Mitchell thing came out 30 years before. But it looks like the same guy at the same age. I don't know. That's just something I noticed. Maybe it's pretty weird. But anyway, yeah, so other than that, I gotta tie it into the fact that this episode is kind of forgotten by canon, because when they're talking about Soong-type androids in Next Gen, they act like this is the first kind of android ever invented, and no scientist has ever been able to create androids. I mean, this goes for this episode and iMud, but iMud was more of this weird alien planet. This was like a Federation human scientist who had created and in fact became an android himself. How'd they forget about him? What was just, Soong's technology based off of them? This seems actually more advanced than Soong's android because they looked more human-like and passed for humans, and you could put human consciousness inside of it, which is something they didn't accomplish until much, much later, as I said at the end of Season 1 of Picard. So they kind of wiped this from canon, or just pretended like it didn't exist, because it kind of should have been mentioned. It's kind of relevant, don't you think? And they're acting like Soong's technology was a breakthrough, but some dude in a cave pulled it off 30, 50 years before. Or no, it was 100 years before, that's right. In a cave! But nobody really cares. But anyway. My rating for What Are Little Girls Made Of out of 10 is a 5 average. I think I'm being generous by giving it a 5. Maybe I should give it a 4, but it's not that bad. As I said, it's kind of just forgettable. It's a lot of plot contrivance involved and the red shirt deaths. I think technically this was the very first red shirt death in Star Trek. But they were actually wearing it. There were red shirt deaths before this. They just weren't wearing red shirts, but they were red shirt deaths. Well, this is the first time they were actually wearing a red shirt. And yeah, it was done so cliche. And yes, the plot contrivance. But I mean, as I said, they try to make it interesting with Christine Chapel character explanation. They try to make it interesting with the Kirk and his battle of wits, but yeah, I don't know. I do think I'm generous by being a 5. Maybe I'll change it to a 4. No, I'll keep it to a 5. I'll be generous today, but it's a very low 5. Anyway, that is it for my review of what, pray tell might I ask, are little girls made of. Now, as always, as a new feature on my channel, I want to give a big thank you, big shout out to those who support me on Patreon. Definitely very much appreciated. Definitely keep the channel going. Huge shout out to Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Avals, Brian A., Alessandro Migalacio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Howells. Thank you oh so very much for your contributions. It is extremely appreciated. So next, where are we at? So next week I will be actually skipping the original series reviews, as I'll be releasing 2 Star Trek top tens as well as my review for the latest episode of Prodigy. Um, so there won't be any Star Trek original series reviews next week. So next week's Monday is going to be my top 10 Star Trek episodes I hate that everyone else seems to love. And then Saturday is going to be my top 10 Star Trek episodes everyone else hates that I don't think are that bad. I think they're fine. So those 2 top 10s will be next week, kind of the companion piece to my over and underrated top 10s. And so I will return with my original series reviews the following week, December 19th, with Dagger of the Mind. Will be, coming on Monday the 19th. So keep an eye out for that, and be sure to, if you can, support me on Patreon. Very much appreciated. If not, subscribe, leave a like. Very much appreciated also. And check out my channel as I do many more Star Trek videos and videos on other shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.